Life as a bad LARP. Understanding the interaction design of our planet a little bit better. I mean, our planet doesn't come with a manual, does it? LARPs sometimes do. A basic understanding of LARP, live action role-playing, and what is it about, does help here, but my emphasis in this talk focuses on the term life with a long F, as opposed to playing a life out there in the woods, in the countryside, cities, villages, and not in your cellar around a tabletop game behind rule books or a computer screen. My talk invites you to watch yourself like playing a character in a game, set in a particular location with fellow players, but for real. I do apologize from the start, though. It will be a sort of tour de force through well-established LARP design concepts, and some of the thoughts and arguments might come across quite obvious or simple. But if you start to apply the lens, a certain vantage point, things fall into place. Questions I will not answer. Is life a simulation? Are we real? Who is the designer behind all this? And how do we sue the goddamned Wizard of Oz? The aim of this talk is to look on life through the lens of LARP design. And yes, to be judgmental and not necessarily always nuanced. We look on life as if it would be a designed high-resolution LARP experience. Let's call it RLL, Real Life LARP. Opening up gray zones of play in our serious world. And yes, the talk title serves not as a subtle hypothesis. It stresses the point I will hammer home. It is a really bad and tragic one. For a LARP, we need a setting, a stage, a particular place. A LARP is heavily influenced by the playground, the physical environment you play in. It can be a black stage, like in a black box LARP, where you have to imagine the setting, or you play in a real castle or ship. This is our ship, our spaceship. Life takes place on Earth. There is no second Earth. There is no lunar colony or Mars separatism yet. This is the vantage point, a view from orbit, to realize the presence of a whole planet without borders. Usually our experience and views are quite local. Some might not get out from the initial starting point of the LARP, some travel their whole life. But in practice, this is a 510 million square kilometer open world, fully destructible, with limited props, limited resources, several in-game financial systems and currencies, millions of small and large arms with live ammunition, tens of thousands of nuclear warheads on long-range strategic missiles, and 7.5 billion co-players. Who is the game master behind all this? The creator, ultimate designer of physical laws and the evolution of life, leading to our real-life LARP. As I said, that is not a question I can answer. I have no fucking idea. Oh, I have ideas or knowledge about religious beliefs around that theme, but I cannot say if they match anything out there. Let's assume there is an unknown entity, a runtime story facilitator for our LARP, keeping track of plot flow, solving narrative problems in subtle ways maybe. And if applicable, making rule system calls, every 10 billion years, maybe. We do not know the theme of this LARP. We never heard of the organization behind it. Even not when there were major accidents. For convenience or inconvenience, if you are an atheist or nihilist, we assume they are there, so that we can blame them if we fuck it up. We have only two things we can use, either chance or choice, and sometimes they might be the same. Sometimes, but not always. Choice may be nudged by one of the LARP rights, who can be called game masters as well. I call all those who tamper with the narrative LARP rights, players or characters alike. That could be politicians, lawmakers, priests, priestesses, policemen, policewomen, bankers, judges, companies, CEOs, billionaires, influencers, actors, actresses, and so on. They all tell the view of the LARP and its story arcs. But let's not forget that in the background other characters are writing their speeches, fetching their garbage, selling their goods in shopping malls, and curing them in hospitals. Meet me, one of your fellow co-players. My name is Herwig Egon Casadoro Kopp, short Heck. I'm living in Berlin and Venice, but my roots are from Austria. I'm a media artist and former brain researcher with a passion for borders of learning and immersive interactive storytelling. I'm playing the RLL with you, the Real Life LARP, since the beginning of the 70s when the gold exchange standard fell, thanks to co-player Nixon. Since then, everything got a bit more complicated. But don't panic. I will not try to convince you we are inside of a LARP actually, or the Matrix, or how to create LARPs through observing real life. Others are better at that. On the contrary, this talk is about inviting you to observe life as if it would be a designed LARP. A character is the fictional persona a participant portrays during runtime. Sometimes character is also used to refer to the character description. That is an inspiration for the character actually played. Inspiring a character is an art form. Participating in RLL, we learn to perform characters like real mothers, lawyers, bakers, accountants, nurses, actors, football players, soldiers, scientists, gardeners, friends, enemies, and so on. But we are still also global players in the big LARP. Individual beings living and breathing, not always in character. In LARP, we choose to play characters. For example, an investigative journalist in space. See me in Icarus, a LARP in an abandoned mine in Bergamo, Italy. Or impersonating the character of a robot playing a desperado in a Westworld setting in Almeria in the LARP Conscience in 2018. Or an aristocrat at the court of Claudius scheming around Prince Hamlet in the real castle of Elsinore in 2015. A freak show director dealing with a supernatural threat while sailing to London on board the Demeter in a LARP of the same name in 2016. But all these characters came alive with the help of my co-players. Meet your co-players. At birth and through life in RLL, every generation may come with their own icons, stories, music and values, but usually depending basically on one crucial factor: on other human beings. The second factor, often raised as indispensable, may be the exchange paradigm like the economy, but all this would not work without the consent of other human beings. To spice it up, we are exposed to chance as well, in the mix of inherent factors, and to physical laws, all of which we try to mitigate together with our fellow human beings. It seems we are caught in inter-immersion forever. In a LARP, a participant is pretending to be a character, but is also pretending that everyone else is their character. The feedback from the other participants enhances the character immersion, creating a cycle called inter-immersion. That is why everything feels so real, that our roles in society do work because others are working hard to be immersed in their roles, forming a codependent, semi-stable society of roles we play. To quote Eirik Vatland from the Knutepunkt book 2017 about originality, LARPs don't tell stories. Players do. LARPs are filled to the brim with the basic elements of story: character, motivation, conflict, illusion, tension, transition. The designer never provides all these elements. Once you start improvising, you do what you do in real life. You fill out the blanks with bits and pieces of behavior from your own memories. Not just what you have experienced firsthand, but also from the stories you have consumed. The postmodern pop culture of RLL uses hooks to place a story in the minds of consumers, to get them to action. Buy tickets, fly, no matter the cost, fandom, whatever it takes, watch a series, buy the book, play the game, purchase in-game loot. And immerse them in their favorite cultural events. Concerts, reality TV shows, LARP events, parties, conferences, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. Ah! The 50,000-year-old technique of storytelling is getting monopolized. We have told traditional stories around the campfire on cave walls, with books, films, TV, etc. Now on social media, games, mobiles, streaming channels. We are constantly distracted and bombarded by the stories of our fellow players, usually badly told. Rip-offs are king. Storytelling is done by the tweets of a president. While shock politics push through the agenda of a few and we are confined at home in the COVID-19 crisis, we are watching local dystopian news or take pictures of our latest food porn, baked bread or cute children going crazy. Dwell in the 50 shades of selfie or update our status during social distancing. Well, love in modern times. Aristotle reasoned that we draw knowledge and consolation from tragedies only because they do not happen to us. Without this distance, tragedy could not give rise to catharsis. Maybe that is why LARP works so well. In our thought experiment, we are not a passive audience. Like in cinema, we are the factors. We are the actors forming the narrative. All things that exist inside of the fiction of a LARP are part of the diegesis. For example, music during the runtime of a LARP is part of the diegesis if the characters can hear it, and non-diegetic if only the players can hear it. In our case, observing life on our planet as a LARP, all things on Earth are by default diegetic. But with selective ignorance of a certain character at a certain time, we could keep up an artificial distinction between diegetic and non-diegetic, opening an option, a gap, to glance at the player too. It may help us to still gain catharsis through a certain distance. It is sometimes called self-reflection, filter bubble, imagination, or madness. All things that happen during runtime are true within the world of the LARP. So in-game will be everywhere, during our whole lifetime. The world, the planet, our society are true within the world of our LARP, RLL. Therefore, there is no off-game, which can become quite stressful at times in a high-achiever society full of bullshit jobs. But as our unspeakable unknown LARP designer throws in pandemic diseases at will, workers being supermarket cashiers or bus drivers may become system relevant overnight, and influencers and business consultants jobless. It almost feels like a pre-written plot change to calibrate our LARP. But is it a game? Can we look at it like a game? Are we game? A game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. The definition of Eric Zimmerman and Katie Salen about games in general is falling short in LARP, as the quantifiable outcome is usually quite personal and subjective. But it might be exactly the neoliberal game narrative imposed on the planet since Reagan and Thatcher, a quantifiable outcome. A gain, a profit, a surplus, a game of numbers. LARP, with its win-to-lose proposition and subjective experiences as a takeaway, is not as quantifiable as casual games on the smartphone. And that is an advantage of the LARP paradigm, which does help in our special perspective. So is the world sprung from the minds of game designers? Sid Meier declares, a game is a series of meaningful choices. For evaluating RLL, we are not asking a heroic Neo who sees through the game, but we ask the normal citizen of this planet. I make a bold guess about meaningful choices at hand. Definitely no. or a yes with big limitations. Why does it feel like reduced meaning and choices in 2020? Maybe the old quote of Plautus applies. Homo hominis lupus est. A man is a wolf to another man. That we are exposed to our fellow human beings with constant aggression and threat. Are we consequently bound to competitiveness? Maybe. Maybe we can choose differently. Viola Spolin, a pioneer legend in improvisation, reframed competition in an interview in 1987 in the following way. The excitement does not come from competition, it comes from extending yourself. In competition, there is the approval-disapproval syndrome at play, she says. And it's killing us. It lays in fear, and if you lay in fear, you cripple people, in her opinion. A world built on competition, drenched in fear, may simply cripple us and prevent us from extending, from improvising well. So lucidly, she adds, I don't believe in success nor failure. Our real-life LARP is the only one available. A monopoly, so to speak. Nobody asked us to sign up for it, pay a certain fee or choose roommates. Nobody asked for consent at the start. Hopefully we get asked for more consent more often during our runtime, though. It needs no special story to sell it, or a travel plan to get there. Our human LARP franchise in nature is a psychodrama spanning hundreds of thousands of years and hundreds of generations of players. No matter what and how we play inside of it, it seems to be the only LARP available. Welcome to this setting. And let's admit it, it very much looks like the tabletop game Monopoly. Our world is riddled with monopolies and executing control through in-game currencies. Yes, there is always also a cheater's edition. We are born in and we help to give rise to powerful structures of monopolies as we grow up on our board. And yes, you can argue embedded in a universe. It appears to be written around the theme, what can you get away with? Sure, tabletop is not live action, but our troubles worldwide, also in climate change, seem to stem from such attitudes. In our world with Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, BP, Microsoft, WeChat, Alibaba, the game is rigged. You cannot win. We are mined for meaning. What once was a conversation, the new social interconnectivity by the internet, has become our honeypot, luring us into offering our psychodramas for free. We exchange things which matter for us, our content, for the scraps of some likes or the attention of a few. In the end, our content, our opinions, do not matter. This feeds the Orwellian brother of big data, helping to market brands and politics to us. Only a few gain from worldwide data mining. The rest is stagnating or barely getting out of unhealthy slavery. Billions want to leave the working class to become middle class in a world where there is less and less work available, while algorithms take over our chores. In RLL, 99% stay working class. In a delusion to be middle class if you only share your addictions glued to your overpriced smartphone. While 1% use invented currency standards, not backed by anything, to take possession of most of the real stuff out there. Our water, our energy, our soil, our properties, institutions, our trains and planes, and our minds. A mix of Brave New World and 1984. Let's stay general, using some of the basic LARP concepts at hand. We have one run, one instance of a full staging and playthrough of our LARP. No repetitions. Only if you believe the rebirth faction, there might be more. We do not do workshops before we get born. We do not receive any emails from the organizers or material about our character. When we arrive, we get no briefing. When it ends, there is no debrief. No slowly getting out of the character into being yourself again, called decompression. We are buried or burned. That's it. The runtime is the lifetime and immersion total. 360 degrees, 24/7. Fate in LARP is a play instruction for character action that the participant is obliged to follow. Fate occurs in fate play designs. Designs like that work with the prior consent by participants and/or organizers to certain immutable narrative beats or outcomes. It can be called a conscious design decision that presumes that how something happens or someone feels about it happening can be just as interesting to explore as if it happens by natural dynamics. In my humble opinion, way too many fall into fate play. Call it kismet, or the supposed will of our LARP designer, or prophecy or astrology, where we find solace in not choosing or taking responsibility. It sounds like it had to happen, rather than I wanted it that way, it did blow up into my face, it did not work out at all, and I'm so sorry, but it was interesting. One of the few blunt hypotheses I will bestow upon you. Fiction is the better real. That real is inspiring fiction, obviously, but realism in a designed event may be the better version of it, even to be preferred. However, the stories we live in LARP are filtered through our real-life selves. In the end, our unconscious reactions and interpretations of events are based on real-life experiences. We have been socialized to certain roles and positions of which we are not even fully aware. Exactly. In RLL, the games we invent are based on the things we experience or read about. So LARPs are part of this world, but meta-diegetic. They represent stories within stories. They evolved on this planet like books or theater, but in LARP there can be books or theater-like situations. There would be no LARP without planet Earth. There would be no LARP without people experiencing things and telling stories. But keeping it real and holding on to a fetish of realism, representation, or the antique concept of mimesis may blur the advantage of the art form, deeming that life is somewhat superior. It isn't. Can LARP be rooted in realism, in serious socio-political issues? Oh yes. Not all LARP is competitive fantasy LARP. Take, for example, Europa, deriving its name from a reception center for asylum seekers in the fictive Central European country of Orsenia. Designed by Eric Fatland in 2011, he calls it a sad and serious LARP. It had a strong emphasis on realism in role-playing and scenography, building a 360-degree illusion, as well as claiming real-world relevance for its themes. Nationalism and national identity, the treatment of refugees, and the dehumanizing nature of bureaucracy. No pre-written characters, no runtime direction, no dramatic arc, no off-play. Fatland says the play had one singular goal: to experience this. Well, familiar? It's still ongoing that people are seeking entrance into Fortress Europe for real. Every day. Although LARP is an excellent vehicle for creating strong emotions, it cannot replicate other people's experiences, but it can try. We may attempt to respectfully play the stories of others and learn from it. The Palestinian-Finnish LARP Halat Hisar tried to create an alternative reality where Finland lived through an apartheid regime and occupation similar to real-world Palestine. Halat Hisar does not teach a Nordic person how to really feel to live under occupation, but it can open the doors for more empathy and connection with those on our spaceship Earth who face such badly designed environments every day. In 2015, the LARP Hinterland in Sweden used real weapons and real physical misery, making participants experience the life of a refugee for 2 days, including a contagious infection called Rosen. Most weapons used by the characters were knives or tools, such as old pitchforks, for example. Real, sharp ones, not the buffer versions. Weapons in Hinterland were more a way to control or influence people and situations than actual fighting tools, thus serving the LARP's agenda of social control and suppression in a refugee camp. Participants' accounts were staging later that when properly workshopped, real knives meant more drama. being a real refugee for months or years really sucks. It is for sure a traumatizing experience to leave your home and seek to cross into another country or life, hoping for more safety, healthcare, or better working conditions. Or you're just fleeing from getting bombarded, shot at, or persecuted, or sent away by your own family to seek work somewhere else. And then, these people, the co-players in this other paradise country, feel threatened by you, isolate you, and do not want to share. Is it bad to play a pressured, disadvantaged character when others are preying upon you in a LARP? Well, no. On the contrary, in fact, LARPers have developed a taste to seek out something like this in LARPs. Experience for a short time and in a safe way to lose. It has become a concept underlined in the Nordic Larp community to create better drama by not trying to win, letting other characters lose. It is used in a collaborative playstyle rather than a competitive playstyle. Some even steer towards play to lift, meaning that the responsibility of your drama and your character also rests on all your co-players. You have to lift each other. Great in a LARP, very rare as a conscious choice in our societies poisoned by neoliberalism. Note that the win we are talking about is a win for the player, not for the character. That means in real life psychodramas we could agree to lose or win big time to lift someone up, based on what we know about their character. We would lift others in the collective to be more happy, but also distribute our spoils differently, attributing our victories not just to a single action, but to collective achievement. See the Navy captain Brad E. Crozier of the US aircraft carrier Eleanor Roosevelt, who got fired recently because he dared to speak up about a COVID-19 outbreak on his ship, sacrificing his own career. Shunned by his superiors, hailed by his crew. Alibis enable a person to roleplay and do things they would never do in everyday life while playing a character. They are a cornerstone of LARP design. And the more and better alibis one provides or comes up with, the better the improvisation and the smoother the play. Alibis can be used for good or bad play, giving you too much agency, cutting the freedom of others and invading their borders, or lifting them up. Masks provide alibi for interaction. They open and invite to play, provide excuses, cover for positive or negative characters' actions.
There are only two types of people in this world. Those who love cocaine, and those who have never tried it.
Welcome to RLL. Masks have just become protection from interaction. Not great. Less play. At the Bridge of Sorrows, we mourn the alibi to have fun behind the decorative concealment of one's identity, liberating from social norms. The red zone implemented in the Demeter region on the 8th of March 2020 impedes even the most innocent joys of wearing a mask in Carnival in Venice, once a 7-month period of festivities per year in the 18th century. Today, because of austerity cuts and arrogant infinite growth amidst just-in-time production mentality, a simple virus is putting our spaceship Earth in quarantine for months, and people die instead. The once so proud Western industrial nations cannot even provide the protective gear in time for our healthcare workers, let alone the citizens. No fun. Okay, narrative design sucks. All design choices made in the service of enabling participants to tell stories feel like not in control of the participants. Fake news reign, media and free journalism are on the short leash and under the heel of commercialization and clicks. We have no clue where this is going and lack often the grand narrative to motivate people for collective action. Maybe climate crisis is a game changer. Let's see. The project of liberating people is not over. We will need a major update. Signaling consent or dissatisfaction, possible through democratic voting or demonstrations, we may move what certain characters are willing to do in their roles. Will we? Or through staying home. Later maybe coming in handy as a rehearsed tool for civil disobedience and calling for change. The magic circle. Metaphor for the separate space of playing. The time and space of the LARP in which characters are played and different rules apply than normal. Magic circle. Metaphor for the separate space of playing. The time and space of the LARP in which characters are played and different rules apply than normal. In RLL, magic circles upheld by a social contract matter the most. They may vary significantly and give rise to nations, schools, bars, pension systems, hospitals, and LARPs. We can change our social contract. That is our agency, but we cannot escape the playground. Our Earth is our ultimate magic circle, one might say, more safely while expanding ourselves, our solar system. The only player outside of it is a prop we call Voyager 1, which is on an extrasolar trajectory, on March 12, 22 being 148.61 astronomical units, or 22.2 billion kilometers away from Earth in interstellar space. Steering is the process in which a player influences the behavior of her character for non-diegetic reasons. It forms a sort of dual consciousness, the one of the player and the one of the character. As we define RLL to be diegetic all the time, it has to be called a meta technique. There is no escape. All steer somehow, with varying depth and impact. See Play to Lose. The art of steering, bringing the player and the character back together, may be one of the few weapons to fight bad LARP design on our planet-wide LARP. If we fail, we can watch the ship of fools sinking on which we all venture into the unknown. PARALARP are called the practices, designs and texts surrounding the runtime to enable the playing of that LARP. We have a rich heritage at hand of oral and written traditions, science, theater, philosophy, religion, recorded human attitudes from which we can learn and choose. Those archives and memories may be a big help when being brutally thrown into RLL, making sense of this world and what may matter. Strengthening our PARALARP institutions, schools, universities, and keeping records and our collective memory up may counter bad outcomes and attempt to usurp our game for personal gain. Mechanics that allow participants to communicate player to player about their characters without breaking play are called meta techniques. They are commonly employed to let participants share their inner thoughts or motivations, or let participants together establish narratives about their characters' shared history and relationships. If those techniques establish a new story within a story, we can call this a meta-diegetic level. Using meta techniques to see through stories within stories is complicated, but this kind of reasoning, exchange and discourse may be one of the most important ways of steering and making sense. Getting a feeling for who that player actually is, besides all the roles, besides performing as a character. Meditation may help. Dialogues, literature, rituals, conversations, yoga or contemplation to form an attitude helping to support a desired escalation or de-escalation in society, or even more close to home, first in the player. I consider this to be part of the few positive levers for interaction in RLL, a chance to steer your co-players through example and persuasion, like with this talk. Unfortunately, our RLL turns out to be not much of a collaborative style LARP that has no victory conditions and encourages participants to share and co-create, rather than conceal information and best each other. We seem to be still immersed in a largely competitive style LARP in which there is a victory condition that only limited numbers of players can achieve. RLL seems to be designed as a competitive BOFFER LARP. A LARP where fighting with buffers made from latex foam is a central feature, and that can be fun indeed. Only if we deal with real weapons that kill and coerce here all the time, a BOFFER LARP seems like a cakewalk. From club to sword to tank, carpet bombing or the hydrogen bomb, who has the biggest aircraft carrier rules the LARP. Sad but true, and actually not much fun. The money spent on these real weapons on Terra outpaces the budget for education or health in several magnitudes. That is why violent change might not be a great way to rewrite the rules. Escalation, the process of incrementally increasing or decreasing the intensity of a scene to come to the optimal atmosphere for all players involved. Sometimes there is a special meta techniques for signaling desired de-escalation, sometimes not. In our RLL, the de-escalation does not work well. Escalation is thriving in shock politics and populism. Sadly, a calculated step back, playing on the fears of people, and an annoying disruption method to keep people segregated, individualized, and undermining the voices of reason, devaluating intellectuals and scientists. Well, obviously, LARP design sucks in this regard as well on our planet. Everything feels like a threat, from saber-toothed tigers to financial instruments invented for rotten real estate scheming, bad healthcare watered down by austerity and selling off common goods, the commons, to oversee hedge funds and multinationals not paying taxes. In RLL, no safe word has an effect. There is no off-game shelter you may hide in. Whatever you do, any counterculture will immediately be fictionalized, commodified, and utilized by RLL to diffuse its revolutionary momentum. Situationists like Guy Debord or Raoul Van Eyck have found out already in the 60s when their détournement and psychogeography of the Society of the Spectacle diffused into the popular market jargon, and they could watch the flower kids slowly become the establishment. There are no revolutions anymore. The Society of the Spectacle has found an antidote: commercialization, fashion, and the false hope that we become as rich as our oppressors, if we only shut up. But it gives a lot of people great alibi to play if you are opposing that, calling the not-so-natural invented world order into question. Jane Fonda got herself arrested several times in Washington, and the co-leader of the British Green Party got dragged away in handcuffs on his birthday at Trafalgar Square. Times are changing. Maybe RLL is getting interesting. That is why I like LARPs, especially Nordic Larp, over life. It's safer, more consistent, highly collaborative, and play to lose is socially supported. As a reminder, the primary weapon to fight fate in RLL, we located the meta techniques. So trying to think as a player, not as a character, to deconstruct what the LARP does to you. Our second was PARALARP and steering through storytelling. The third hope we may have as a wannabe LARP designer of our own life may be herd competence. The amount of competence in the ensemble of participants. Running a LARP for a group of participants where some have prior experience is much easier than running a LARP for a group with only beginners. If there is enough experience in the room, beginners can learn by following the example set by more experienced participants. It means battling anti-intellectualism and lifting experienced players, building networks of trust. If we want to grow into a stampede and change things, we need to get competent ourselves or trust others to be competent enough to steer into the right direction. If we lack trust, we stay sheep, getting fenced in and pushed into all sorts of directions by hustlers and rustlers, subdued by individualism. Is life a good Nordic LARP? Scandinavian style. Nordic style LARP or Nordic LARP is a term used to describe a tradition of LARP game design that emerged in the Nordic countries. Some aims and ideals said to be typical for this unique gaming scene include a focus on immersion, collaboration, and artistic vision. Immersion, although a debated term, oh yes. Collaboration, as we said, no. Too competitive here. Artistic vision would mean more than entertainment and aiming on the personal, psychological, or socio-political long-term effect. Definitely no. Other than bowing to the beauty of the landscapes and the amazing evolution of life, our own little tampering with the narrative does fall short in 99% of the cases to have any artistic vision. 1% is really beautiful though. Presently, we fucked the planet up, and the unfolding climate crisis will show our will and strength to change the style of our game for good, or we get lost in the competitive style of the extraction paradigm, continuing to destroy our environment for profit. It looks like it will not stay below 2 degrees Celsius of global warming due to rising annual emissions, changing the weather patterns of the planet and reaching tipping points. Thousands of studies conducted by researchers around the world have documented changes in surface, atmospheric, and oceanic temperatures. Melting glaciers, diminishing snow cover, shrinking sea ice, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and increasing atmospheric water vapor. What a shit show! I mean, I appreciate the conflict potential this LARP is building up, so there's a lot of reason and alibi to play, but still, quite a dystopia. And then came SARS-CoV-2 in addition, and we put the world in lockdown. Struggling to see the connections with the paradigms of exponential growth, globalization is harming us as it produces a harsh contrast between winners and losers, producing more and more sacrifice zones. As species, we bleed and we draw blood. We get other species extinct in our ignorance. Yes, we bleed a lot. For real. Getting killed by COVID-19 due to mismanagement, fleeing places submerged in wars, running from the consequences of areas getting submerged in water due to global warming. Bleed in LARP means when emotions bleed over between player and character, in either direction. In a real-life LARP of our magnitude, bleeding may be literally the perceived and lived psychodrama as well as physical drama to be alive in an unequal and unjust world full of resources with a very bad distribution ethos, where you are still pressured to play your assigned character: birth, school, work, and death. Blockbuster LARPs are long-form LARPs that target an international audience, feature an expensive venue, sport high participation fees, and are hyped before and after. They usually have a high concept idea, often based on existing intellectual property. Is RLL a good blockbuster LARP? That's easy. No. It looks like rather a big ballbuster LARP, for only a few actual playing and having fun, while the rest is watching their exploits, successes and failures on TV. I would not sign up. The waiting list is too long and the theme unclear. The locations are gorgeous though. Too expensive, too long, lifelong, and too much of a high risk of dying in the end, for real. Very few safety mechanisms and not enough masks for everybody. And this dreadful social distancing mechanic. Let's compare it to... Is RLL any good? Is RLL any good in comparison to Demeter Celestra? Played in 3 runs in March 2013 in Gothenburg, Sweden on a real museal warship, the destroyer Småland, which was turned into a spaceship inspired by Battlestar Galactica. What do we actually have in RLL? SpaceX, giving boost to the sleeping US space program, is there for around 10 years. A single entrepreneurial venture, but despite big visions about colonizing Mars, we are not a spacefaring planet and do not occupy 12 colonies for now. Nobody will join space tourism soon, and the founder Elon Musk is a strong opponent of AI. Ever been in orbit? Training for space takes months, and being up there for long is very unhealthy for your bones and reproductive organs. What about Inside Hamlet? With several reruns since 2015 in the real Hamlet Castle in Denmark, it can be called a big success for transferring yourself into the classic tragedy written by Shakespeare. Well, in real life, castles are difficult to heat up. You are as unlikely to be born as an aristocrat nowadays than in the Ancien Regime. And we forget easily the ennui of the wealthy, hiding in their estates, marketing their way of living as superior and seeding envy until all that hunting and having feasts to cover the boredom instigates a revolution and their heads get chopped off. For real. Healthcare? King Louis XV was dying miserably of smallpox. His physicians mistook for measles he might have had as a child, and they thought him to be immune. Smallpox got eradicated by vaccinations eventually in 1977. Gothic horror on board of the Demeter, fending off Count Dracula? Well, big fun indeed, if you sail across Danish waters to end tragically because everybody was harboring secrets. The fear from the supernatural is no secret in real life, and it poisons a lot of interaction. The notion of vampirism has existed for millennia. Cultures such as the Mesopotamians, Hebrews, ancient Greeks, Manipuri and the Romans had tales of demons and spirits which are considered precursors to modern vampires. Despite the occurrence of vampiric creatures in these ancient civilizations, the folklore of the entity known today as the vampire originates almost exclusively from early 18th century southeastern Europe folklore, the strigoi, or the upir, when verbal traditions of many ethnic groups of the region were recorded and published. Apotropaics, items able to ward off revenants, like garlic, mirrors, holy water, runes, crosses, were items of belief used for centuries to fight supernatural beings coming back from the dead and consuming the blood or flesh of the living. Staking and decapitating the dead were common practices. Romani people drove steel and iron needles into a corpse's heart and placed bits of steel in the mouth, over the eyes, ears and between the fingers at the time of burial. You do not want to do this for real. Now in 2020 we fear the virus coming from bats, infecting human lungs and ravaging through the world, and no garlic helps. Fairweather Manor, a LARP based on the series Downton Abbey, got staged several times on Castle Można in Poland. You could play aristocrats who gather for the Duke's birthday, or servants who work on site, tending to the Duke's family or the nobles. We talked already about aristocrats. Servants did mostly also not live up to the romanticized picture of being the actual important soul of the house, like in Downton Abbey or the House at Eaton Place. A life in servitude was still largely miserable. 24/7, and abuse and being mistreated for minimal pay the common fate. It was physically demanding. I can tell. I played a footman in Fairweather Manor for 2 days. Those stairs. And no social insurance was helping you. Only the goodwill of your masters. We do not have to talk about how bad slavery was for people for thousands of years. I just remind you that the custom to keep people as property, commodity for forced labor of any kind, was abolished as a legal practice only 40 years ago. With the ban in Mauritania in 1981, there is now no legal basis for slave trade and slavery in any country in the world anymore. 1981. Nevertheless, in April 2006, Terre des Hommes published figures that over 12 million people must be still considered slaves nowadays. These numbers were later confirmed by the United Nations. About half of them are children and adolescents, victims of human trafficking, forced labor, or recruited as child soldiers. Mid-2016, a report published by the Walk Free Foundation estimated the number to be more than 40 million. Many more of us players are kept in precarious, slave-like working conditions, often through debt bondage, deprivation of liberty at work, long and exhausting working days, where conditions may correspond to the form of contractual wage labor, but they actually come close to slavery. Similar things can be said for Icarus and the Expanse LARP in a mine in Bergamo, set in a mining asteroid in the belt, or Conscience, a Westworld LARP in Almeria, playing in a real fake Wild West town, including real hosts and real tourists. But I imagine you do not want to die in a frontier town in the mud, or during a reactor meltdown somewhere in space. And no, we do not get up again after we are getting shot for real. And our memories die with us. So, we come to a bold but somewhat controversial conclusion. I suppose LARP is not a rip-off of real stories. They are the only way to experience intense, dangerous times in a safe way. The world feels rather like a bad rip-off of well-designed LARP. Like a nightmarish Westworld version of a game where all the safeguards got fused. Reality can be called the worst game ever. Takeaways. LARP can help us get from passivity into activity, to break the practice of mere spectatorship. This view calls for a responsibility in creating our lives, in our one and only run of RLL. There are limits. There are limits. Shout, "I'm mad as hell! I can't take it anymore!" if the LARP design sucks. Demand better LARP design in your life. Demand for everybody. Play to lift. Better food, better education, better healthcare. Abundance rather than scarcity. And do not reward competitive cheaters. Let's listen to an uplifting quote by Viola Spolin.
I do feel that the day will come, I doubt that I will be here for it, when people will meet from everywhere to play the game, to question where am I, who am I, and what am I doing. And so perhaps together all of us can seek and perhaps evoke the oracle to answer our questions.
I'll end with a quote from Europa, the LARP. It was at times gruelingly, mind-numbingly boring. But that is a good review. Let's hope we learn from LARP design so that the real Europe, and in general our planet, does get even better reviews from not only 1%, but 99% of the participants soon. Thank you for your time and attention. See you out there. Stories, 15 stories. I lost my life. Improvisational and there's more to play. And trajectory. RLL. Look at a tongue breaker. His little head is that. It's a mess.